So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to reflect on kind of either how you were feeling this weekend, like how your weekend went, and kind of get an overall like kind of feeling, or kind of how you're feeling about this week going forward. So when I think about how I'm feeling kind of tired. So then what we're going to do is we're going to connect that feeling with kind of that facial expression. Think about, I know that we're not always seeing facial expressions because of masks, but think about what that facial expression would look like. So in Webchemy, so I'm going to go ahead and I have this all open so that you can kind of see. This is referring to the color that I'm going to paint with. So if you click on that, you're going to be able to, just like in a lot of other programs, you're going to be kind of able to change that color. The other thing that you can do over here, this is swatches and color scheme. So you can go ahead and say, hey, I really like this color. I feel like it matches. I can also pick a color here, and once it's there, I can then kind of drag it into that color scheme. So I can kind of set a color scheme. But when I'm looking at that purple, I don't know if that really matches because it seems kind of vibrant for what I'm trying to communicate. And I'm kind of trying to communicate like, gosh, I'm kind of tired. So I'm making a piece about kind of feeling tired. So the colors that I'm using are going to match that. So I'm choosing a little bit more muted colors. Again, this is an eraser. And then this is just what's kind of selected, that brush that you're going to use. So this one is going to give you a line, and then you're going to play with the size there. This is kind of that fill. And then this is kind of a pull shape that you don't have a lot of control over. So I'm going to start with this. And kind of when I'm feeling tired, I don't necessarily have like a big smile. I don't have a frown. I just kind of have like, and I'm starting from the middle because I'm using that middle to kind of start with my facial expression. So I'm thinking, that's kind of like my facial expression when I'm tired. Like, it's not really a smile. It's not really a frown, but it went in as kind of this abstract shape because that's kind of how I use it. And I just kind of played with my mouse as I went along. Now what I'm going to start to do is I can start to play with, maybe I want to bring in some other shapes. And notice it's symmetrical on both sides. So I'm really just kind of thinking about the shapes that I'm using, just playing with it and experimenting. I can also play with like what happens when I erase, maybe. Ooh, it's not going. There we go. There we go. It's on top of, it's color on top of versus an eraser. So I'm going to keep building that up, and I'm thinking as I'm working, I'm thinking about my color scheme. I'm thinking about the shapes that I'm using, but I don't want to cover everything up. Hey, that's not too terrible. And I just, again, backed out of it, and I'm just kind of really experimenting and playing. This is kind of how you start to develop those ideas. So if I want to go ahead and do just a stroke, so that's something that's just going to give me a line, I will tell you that line is really skinny. So if you want something a little thicker, and I'm just thinking about shapes. Notice it doesn't kind of self-correct, like this shape kind of like self-corrected as it filled. Anytime I do something and I don't like it, under those three dots, I have an undo button. So maybe I would like it if I made it a little bit bigger, so it kind of matched that same feel of having kind of more shapes. Ooh, I do like that more. Right? So I'm just kind of playing. I'm not trying to make it look like anything. That facial expression, that first line that I put down was really just kind of my starting point, and then everything else is a response to that. By keeping a simple color scheme, it's going to be easy to start to communicate that. The other thing that I can also start to do is I can start to play with the opacity. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose fill. And I'm going to pick a different color. I want some. There we go. I think this is going to match. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to pull that into my color scheme. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put something over the top of it. Right now my opacity is at 100%. So when you see it, it goes directly over it. So I'm going to undo that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my opacity down. So this is where your artwork starts to get really interesting because it starts to overlap, and it's really about how those colors are interacting because they're opaque, transparent, and you're playing with that percentage a little bit, which is kind of nice. I will tell you, you don't want to get too busy, but playing with different sizes of shapes, different fills. Here's this like pulse shape. It's kind of crazy. I'm going to make sure that my opacity is all the way up just so you can kind of see it. So, and it's a different one every time. Just kind of play a little bit. And then if I don't like it, and I can undo for quite a bit. The other thing that I can do is I can do a fill, but then I can say, hey, I'd rather have a gradient. So this is a nice thing, especially for the word that I use, which was kind of tired. So I'm going to go back to that blue. I want to make it a little bit darker. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to mimic that. But because I have that gradient on, it kind of gives me that opacity, which is kind of fun. The other thing that I can do is as I'm working, notice this was all horizontal. I can also mirror vertically if that's something that I want to do. Notice it's still, the gradient is still on, so it's kind of fuzzy and that brush didn't work really well. So I'm like, I don't like that. This is all about kind of you figuring out what you do like, what you don't like. You don't like the color, you don't like the shape. What is it about that? And as you start to build your creativity, you're like answering and kind of problem solving those questions that come up as you're working. The last thing that you're going to do 6 minutes before the period ends is you're going to save it. So you are going to come back to, hang on a second. Those 3 dots. Nope, the piece of paper. Sorry, the piece of paper. And you're going to save it as a PNG. And I'm going to title it, what was I feeling? Tired. Tired abstract, right? Because that's kind of how I was feeling. That way I remember what I was doing. That was kind of my goal. I'm going to push save. And it's going to go into your downloads.